Irish wakes are one of the most distinctive and unique parts of our culture. People often find it strange that after a person passes on, we often celebrate their death. So in this video, I want to try and explain the history behind Irish wakes because they are way older than you might imagine. But I brought you here to a place called Knockeen outside Waterford because there's nowhere more suited to explain this history than this site here. This is a place where Irish people have come for thousands and thousands of years to bury the dead. So right behind me, you can see the ruins of a medieval church that dates back to the Middle Ages. Here you can see more modern graves. These date from the late 18th century. But then behind me, and I'm going to bring you over there later on, behind those trees over there is a 5,000-year-old tomb. And in this video, I'm going to show you how some of the traditions that date back to that tomb over there, which we'll investigate later on in this video, explain the history of wakes and where they come from. But to start the story, I want to bring you inside the ruins of this medieval church, and we're going to look at what exactly a wake is and how in the very recent past they were much more raucous and different than we might imagine. How people played tricks on the bereaved family, how they'd gamble and drink really heavily at wakes. So let's go inside the ruins of this medieval church and start that story. This church has obviously seen hundreds, probably thousands of funerals, but the Irish wake took place long before a body ever entered the church. And as you're going to see in this video, it's not really a Christian tradition. It stretches back way before that. Now, a few weeks ago, I went to the Irish Wake Museum here in Waterford, just a couple of miles from here, and I sat down with Donnacha O'Callaghan and Cliona Purcell, who are curators in the museum and experts in the whole history of wakes. And Donnacha explained how a wake began. So we're going to take the story from the moment a person passes on through to their burial, because you're going to see an incredible history of traditions that today can often seem strange, unusual, bizarre, maybe even a little inappropriate, but it's all part of that tradition of Irish wakes. So now you're going to hear Donnacha explain what exactly happened to the body after death.
The body laid out usually by local women. No women from the family would be involved in this. You know, it didn't happen. That was a taboo thing, not to touch the corpse if you were a member of the family.
So to fully understand the history of wakes, we've got to appreciate that every aspect of a wake is ritualized. People didn't wake their family members in ordinary sheets. So I should say people were usually waked in their beds, but they wouldn't use ordinary sheets. Every community would have their own wake sheets, and they'd be kept in one house, and when a person passed on, you'd go get the wake sheets, and these would be used in everyone's wake. It was a real community experience.
Wake sheets would often be kept in a community, so perhaps one house might have them, and at the moment somebody died, somebody would be sent to collect them.
Now, along with those rituals, there's a lot of other more common rituals. Indeed, many of you will probably be familiar with one of these. If you've ever had to organise a wake yourself, you'll know some of these. But Donnacha explains now what else had to be done. Things like covering mirrors, stopping clocks, all that were very important in terms of these traditions and rituals.
The corpse laid out would never be left alone. The window opened, clocks stopped, for example, at the time of death, and mirrors in a room covered.
Now, wakes in times past were pretty notorious events, and I often thought this was somewhat stereotyped or overblown. But next you're going to hear from Cliona Purcell, and Cliona's going to talk about some of the stuff that would happen at an Irish wake, particularly in the past, not so much today. And you get a sense that these were pretty raucous events that we would struggle to relate to today. I think if we went into a house and there was a body laid out and some of this stuff was going on, it'd shock you. Just listen to what Cliona has to say.
So you'd see lots of different games and sort of wake amusements as they were known at the time. You'd have, riddles, you'd have, as I said, there'd be gambling. Card games would not be unusual. If you were playing a card game, it was very important to deal a hand for the corpse. The corpse, somebody would play on their behalf, but you would have essentially the dead man's hand.
So gambling at a funeral would be so inappropriate today, but wait till the next thing that Cliona is going to explain to you. This is something I found really hard to relate to. It left me wondering, why were people doing this? I find it really hard to believe that a bereaved person would find comfort in this.
You'd also see a lot of practical jokes. People would get, for instance, under the bed, and they might shake it as somebody comes into the room, so they think she's about to sit up.
You've heard how Irish wakes could be pretty raucous events. You've got drinking, gambling, basically a bit of a party atmosphere. So it's not that much surprise. There was actually a place where people would often meet their future husbands or wives.
As a result, it would not be unusual for a wedding to follow a wake, given that they're around, in the night time, there's a lot of drinking going on. So quite quickly, you'd often have a wedding afterwards.
So a lot of what we've talked about so far is all about the party aspect of a wake, but ultimately it was a funeral. And there was aspects and rituals carried out in the past at Irish wakes that reflected this. And one of the most distinctive is a thing called keening. And this was basically where the bereaved family would hire what essentially were professional criers, so women who'd come in and they'd lament and cry for the deceased person, but in a highly ritualised manner. Don't forget, everything about an Irish wake is about ritual, and this keening reflected this too. So Donncha is going to come back in now and explain exactly what keeners were.
Known as the Maná Quinta, the mourning women, and it was their sort of, I won't say job, but it was their sort of vocation to be able to carry out this type of mourning, this type of formal mourning, usually in the Irish language, in the form of song usually, where there'd be a lot of crying and moaning and lamenting the dead person, maybe singing their qualities as well.
At this point in the video, hopefully you've got a bit of a sense now of what an Irish wake was like in the past. But as I alluded to earlier on, this doesn't sound very Catholic or Christian, and I was curious as to where these ideas came from, and that's what's going to lead us over to the 5,000-year-old tomb. But Donncha starts that journey now by explaining some of the ideas of a wake and where they come from.
They go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, perhaps, to the very first settlers here on this island, way before the coming of Christianity.
The Catholic Church would actually recognise this fact that wakes were relics of a much older pagan tradition, and they were, I suppose, hostile, maybe a good word to describe their attitude towards wakes, but they didn't really like the fact that wakes were taking place and they were maintaining those much older traditions.
Well, they were not too pleased with some aspects of the wake practices. They saw them as pagan, pre-Christian, something to be fought against and stamped out.
So now we've established that wakes stretch back thousands and thousands of years, or at least some of the traditions around them. But I asked Cliona if there's any examples of these traditions surviving into the modern period. Do we have any links to that distant past? Now, while she's explaining that for you, I'm going to move across the site over towards that 5,000-year-old tomb, because that's where our story kind of ends, because we're going to be able to connect some of the oldest traditions around wakes that continue right up to the present to that tomb over there. But Cliona now is going to explain some other aspects of modern Irish wakes that even continue to the present to a certain extent that reflect these much older traditions.
I suppose the big ones you're kind of looking at there, obviously the ancient Irish was really a culture of hospitality. So you're really looking at the feasting and the drinking and the games as that kind of, those really, really very old traditions. It's kind of what we've discovered in the research here.
Now, to continue the story, I want to bring you over and show you this tomb behind me. So that's just like 20 metres from where I was recording at that medieval church. And this site here at Knockeen has been used, as I mentioned earlier on, for thousands and thousands of years to bury the dead. Now, this is the oldest tomb on the site. As I say, it's about 5,000 years old. It's a dolmen. And maybe to explain this, actually, I might go into the tomb and I'll explain it inside so you can get a better sense of it. And you might be wondering at this point, what's this got to do with wakes? Well, inside, you're going to see how some of the rituals practiced at this tomb 5,000 years ago continue on in Ireland right up to the present. It's incredible continuity and explains a lot about where modern Irish wakes come from. So I'm inside that tomb now. Getting in was actually quite a cramped way of doing it. You had to climb in through here. But to explain a little bit of how these tombs were used, or at least how archaeologists think these tombs were used, and this is going to connect up the story to wakes. So these weren't just tombs where the dead were buried, but they were also a kind of a repository of memory, or was where people came to remember past generations. So it's often thought that people would come in here and they might actually physically touch the remains of past generations, and it was kind of a place where they could relate not only to past ancestors but also generations past as well. Now, something that Donncha said in my interview with him really resonated with me in terms of the use of this tomb, even though he's talking about modern wakes now. And this is where, obviously, to bury a person at the gravesite, the earth would be removed from the grave. But sometimes during that process of removing earth from the grave, they'd remove the bones of deceased people, and some of the people gathering around the graveside would discuss those past generations. And this is very much a part of the Irish wake, of talking about past generations. But I just want you to listen to what Donncha is talking about here, because you know, when I talk about how people would have come into this tomb 5,000 years ago and they might look at the bones of past generations and talk about them and remember them in that way, it sounds pretty gruesome or gory, but in many ways there's a continuity between that and what Donncha is going to talk about now.
I remember as a very small child seeing the bones of other members of the family there in the piles of earth, and hearing older neighbours talking about the bones and who they could have been. And
okay, I hope this video has given you a sense of Irish wakes and their incredible history, and how they're certainly not a recent invention. And when I say recent, I don't mean they emerged over the last couple of centuries. They stretch back much, much longer. If you enjoyed this video, I've got a full podcast length interview with Donncha and Cliona available at the link beneath this video, where we talk about lots of different aspects of Irish wakes. That's about 50 minutes long. It's a really great conversation. I also have a link to the Irish Wake Museum in Waterford as well. It's really worth a visit. I pass it every day, and I only visited it a couple of weeks ago, but I was really blown away by the tour there. So I'd strongly recommend checking out that. I have links to that beneath this as well. I will say, if you're going to go, do book tickets, because it can book out. And finally, I'd love to hear your thoughts on lots of this, because lots of you will have attended wakes, seen other rituals and customs in practice. Please do drop a comment below and let me know about it. Thanks for your time. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to see more videos like this where I go out and visit sites, please drop a comment about that below as well. And I'll be talking to you soon on another video.